The stars of the outer rim did not twinkle, they screamed. In the vacuum of the unknown regions, a jagged fissure in reality tore open like a systemic wound, bleeding violet radiation into the cold obsidian of space. From this spatial hemorrhage emerged the Sanctuary II, a vessel of brutal, blade-like geometry that dwarfed the Imperial Architans-class light cruisers currently patrolling the sector. On the bridge of the lead cruiser, the Vigilant, Captain Coulson stared into the holographic display, his face pale beneath the sterile interior lights of the Empire's finest engineering. "Identify that vessel," he barked, but the only response was the frantic chirping of droids and the static of sensors blinded by an exotic energy signature. This was the era of the Galactic Empire, a time of absolute order where every star system bowed to the shadow of the Star Destroyer. Yet, as the massive alien craft began to deploy thousands of drop pods like a swarm of locusts toward the Kyber-rich moon below, the absolute order of the Emperor felt suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. This was not a rebel insurgency, this was an invasion from a nightmare. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop a character name in the comments. Standing upon the observation deck of the Sanctuary II, Thanos, the Mad Titan, looked out at the swirling nebula of a galaxy he did not recognize, yet one that hummed with a familiar, crystalline frequency. In his hand, he held a fragment of raw, pulsing kyber, the lifeblood of this reality. To the locals, it was a focus for laser weaponry or a relic of a dead Jedi Order. To Thanos, it was the raw housing for the Infinity Stones scattered across this new dimension. His arrival had been no accident. The stones called to one another across the multiverse, and they had chosen the heart of the Galactic Empire as their new crucible. He felt the Power Stone vibrating deep within the crust of the moon below, Jeddah. Beside him, Proxima Midnight leaned her spear forward, her eyes fixed on the triangular shapes of the Imperial fleet closing in. "The inhabitants are primitives, my lord," she hissed, clinging to their metal ships and primitive energy bolts. Thanos did not smile. He watched as a star destroyer crested the horizon of the moon, its silhouette a dagger aimed at the heart of his mission. "They are not primitives, Proxima," Thanos rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "They are a civilization built on the very power I seek. They call it order. I call it a stay of execution." Below them, the first wave of Outriders slammed into the Imperial garrison on Jeddah. Stormtroopers trained for precision and suppression found themselves face to face with six-limbed beasts that ignored blaster fire and tore through plastoid armor with feral hunger. The Empire's response was swift and clinical. TIE fighters shrieked through the thin atmosphere, their twin ion engines wailing a mechanical dirge as they dove toward the alien drop sites. In the command centers of the Death Star, still a secret looming in the dark, the great design of Grand Moff Tarkin was suddenly interrupted by a threat that did not care for politics or rebellion. Thanos stepped into his transport, his golden armor catching the glint of distant suns. He would not wait for an invitation. He would take the first stone, and if the Empire stood in his way, he would burn their galaxy until only the ashes of balance remained. The high-pitched whine of TIE interceptors filled the thin atmosphere of Jeddah, a mechanical scream that usually signaled the end of any local insurrection. But as the Imperial pilots dove toward the ancient Holy City, their targeting computers struggled to lock on to the chaotic, shifting mass of the Outrider swarm. On the ground, the disciplined ranks of the 7th 9th Imperial Legion, the Red Fury, found themselves in a meat grinder of biological ferocity. Stormtroopers braced behind portable deflector shields, their E-11 blaster rifles barking in rhythmic volleys. But the Outriders did not retreat. They threw their bodies onto the shields, their multi-limbed forms clawing at the shimmering energy curtains until the generators overheated and popped. High above the carnage, a sleek, needle-like Q-ship descended through the clouds, flanked by the Sanctuary Second's heavy interceptors. Inside, Kull Obsidian and Proxima Midnight prepared for landfall. "The Emperor's lapdogs fight with toys," Kull grunted, his massive chainhammer resting on his shoulder. Proxima didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on a dark shape descending from the upper atmosphere. It wasn't a ship. It was a Lambda-class shuttle, but it was flanked by a squadron of TIE Advanced X-1s that moved with a predatory grace far beyond the standard pilot corps. The shuttle landed at the edge of the Temple of the Kyber, its ramp hissing open to reveal a silhouette wrapped in midnight. Darth Vader stepped onto the sands of Jeddah, the rhythmic rasp of his respirator cutting through the din of explosions and alien roars. He did not look at the fleeing pilgrims or the dying stormtroopers. His focus was entirely on the massive, golden-clad Titan stepping out of the Q-ship across the plaza. Thanos stood a head taller than the Dark Lord, his presence a heavy, suffocating weight in the Force. Not a darkness he recognized, but a void, an inevitability that felt like the heat of a dying sun.
"You possess a power that does not belong to this stars," Vader's voice boomed, amplified by his vocoder. He ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade casting a bloody glow across the ancient stone. "The Emperor demands your submission. You will surrender the artifacts you seek, or you will be erased." Thanos tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over Vader's cybernetic suit and the crackling plasma blade. He saw the pain beneath the mask, the jagged edges of a soul held together by hate. "I have seen many emperors across the cosmos, little machine," Thanos replied, his voice calm, almost pitying. "They all believe their order is the peak of existence. They are all wrong. Your galaxy is overpopulated, its resources drained to fuel your war machine. I am not here to submit. I am here to provide the mercy your master is too blind to offer." With a flick of his wrist, Thanos signaled the Black Order. Proxima Midnight lunged, her three-pronged spear crackling with dark energy that disrupted the very air. Vader met her strike with a deceptive speed, the clash of plasma and alien alloy sending a shockwave that shattered the nearby stone pillars. As Kull Obsidian moved to flank the Sith, Vader raised a black-gloved hand. The heavy stones of the temple began to groan, ripped from their foundations by the sheer will of the Force. They flew through the air like meteors, slamming into the Outrider ranks and forcing the Black Order back.
Thanos watched, unimpressed. He reached into a small satchel at his hip and pulled out a crude, unrefined kyber crystal he had seized from a fallen Imperial transport. He squeezed. The crystal didn't shatter, it sang. To Thanos' attuned senses, the kyber was acting as a beacon, vibrating in resonance with the Power Stone buried deep within the moon's core. A stone the Empire had unknowingly been mining to fuel their ultimate weapon. The ground began to tremble. A massive Imperial mining crawler, a behemoth of steel and treads, crested a nearby ridge, its heavy turbo lasers swiveling to face the Sanctuary II. "Fire!" the Imperial commander screamed. A bolt of green energy, enough to vaporize a city block, tore through the air. Thanos didn't flinch. He simply stepped forward, his massive hand reaching out as if to catch the very air. The Power Stone, still encased in the moon's crust but responding to his proximity, surged. A shockwave of purple energy erupted from the ground, intercepting the turbolaser bolt and turning it into a shower of harmless sparks. Vader felt the surge in the Force, a raw, unbridled power that felt ancient and indifferent. It wasn't the dark side, but it was hungry. He realized then that this invader wasn't just another warlord, he was a fundamental threat to the Sith's dominion. The Empire's strength lay in its ability to crush the will of others, but how do you crush a man who believes he is the instrument of fate itself? The battle for Jeddah had transitioned from a skirmish into a full-scale planetary war. Above them, the Vigilant was already falling, its hull breached by the Sanctuary II's superior weaponry, trailing fire across the darkened sky like a falling star. The Empire's dominance was being challenged by a force that didn't want their throne, it wanted their very foundation. The sulfurous air of Jeddah's moon crust choked the Imperial soldiers, but the Black Order breathed it like incense. Darth Vader stood amidst the swirling grit, his cape snapping in the wind generated by the Sanctuary II's low-altitude hover. He had faced Jedi Masters, insurgent kings, and colossal beasts of the Outer Rim, but the Titan before him possessed a density of presence that felt like a gravitational constant. As Cull Obsidian lunged, his massive chain hammer whistling through the air, Vader didn't retreat. He pivoted, the crimson blade of his lightsaber carving a searing arc through the obsidian-scaled hide of the brute. Cull roared, the wound cauterizing instantly, but the blow had been enough to stagger him. "Your strength is significant," Thanos remarked, stepping over the charred remains of a crushed Death Trooper. "But you fight for a dying dream. This Empire is a cancer of consumption. You strip these worlds of their essence to build monuments to your fear." He raised his hand, gesturing toward the looming shape of an Imperial Star Destroyer, the Dauntless, as it began its orbital bombardment. The sky turned a blinding white as turbo-laser fire rained down, intended to level the Holy City and everything in it to deny the enemy their prize. Vader reached out with the Force, not to shield himself, but to seize a plummeting TIE fighter that had been clipped by the debris. With a guttural snarl of effort, he hurled the starfighter at Thanos. The Titan didn't dodge, he simply punched. His fist, reinforced by his sheer physical constitution and the proximity of the Power Stone's resonance, shattered the cockpit of the TIE fighter into a million shards of twisted durasteel. "I do not fight for a dream, Titan," Vader hissed, his voice a low vibration of menace. "I fight for the only truth, power." Vader ignited his second wind, the Force flowing through him like a dark tide. He moved with a speed that defied his mechanical weight, a blur of black and red. He slashed at Thanos' flank, the lightsaber meeting the Titan's golden greaves. The plasma blade hissed, struggling to bite through the exotic Uru-adjacent alloy of Thanos' armor, but the heat began to melt the golden plating. Thanos countered with a backhand that caught Vader across the chest plate, sending the Sith Lord skidding 20 meters across the cracked stone. Meanwhile, in the trenches below the Temple of the Kyber, the situation for the Empire had turned from a tactical withdrawal into a rout. The Outriders had breached the inner sanctum, where the Empire had been sequestering the largest Kyber crystals for shipment to the DS-1 orbital battle station. The Imperial officers, usually so composed in their gray tunics, were now screaming into comlinks for reinforcements that were currently being intercepted by the Sanctuary II's fighter screens. Deep within the temple's subterranean vaults, Corvus Glaive moved like a shadow. He bypassed the automated sentry turrets with a flick of his blade, his eyes fixed on a pulsating violet glow emanating from a lead-lined containment unit. It wasn't just Kyber, it was the Power Stone, dormant for eons, vibrating in the presence of its master's arrival. The Empire had mistaken it for an anomaly crystal of immense energy density, planning to use it as the primary focuser for the Death Star's superlaser. "The prize is found," Corvus's voice crackled over the Black Order's internal comms. Thanos heard the message, and a grim satisfaction settled over his features. He looked at Vader, who was rising from the rubble, his breathing more labored, the mechanical respirator wheezing. "Our time here is done, Shadow of the Sith," Thanos said. He didn't finish the fight. He didn't need to. He tapped a device on his gauntlet. A blue beam of light, the signature of the Q-ship's transporter, enveloped Thanos and his lieutenants. As they vanished, the ground beneath the Temple of the Kyber began to collapse. The extraction of the stone had triggered a seismic chain reaction. Vader watched, powerless for the first time in a decade, as the alien vessel ascended toward the stars, leaving behind a world in ruins and an empire that had finally met a force it could not intimidate. The bridge of the Executor was a cathedral of cold efficiency, but today the silence was heavy with the scent of ozone and failure. Grand Admiral Thrawn stood at the central viewport, his glowing red eyes fixed on the holographic playback of the Jedha engagement. Beside him, Darth Vader was a statue of scorched durasteel, his cape torn, the rhythmic hiss-purr of his respirator the only sound in the command trench. The Empire had lost a moon, a primary Kyber source, and, more importantly, its sense of invulnerability. Thanos had not just raided an Imperial outpost, he had bypassed the planetary blockades of the most powerful military in the history of the galaxy. "The tactical analysis is clear, Lord Vader," Thrawn said, his voice a calm contrast to the dark energy radiating from the Sith. "This Thanos does not operate on the logic of a conqueror. He did not seize Jedha for its strategic value or its population. He targeted the anomaly crystal we designated C-01. He is a collector of singular, high-density power signatures." Thrawn adjusted a dial on the console, bringing up a map of the core worlds. "And if my projections are correct, his next target is not a military shipyard or a political capital. It is the deep core. He is following the ley lines of the Force itself." Vader's hand tightened into a fist, the metal of his glove creaking. "He possesses a strength that defies the Force. He spoke of balance, Admiral, a delusion of the weak."
"Perhaps," Thrawn replied, "but his delusion has decimated 3 of our Star Destroyers. He uses a form of trans-spatial warping that bypasses traditional hyperspace lanes. We cannot intercept him. We can only be where he is going." Thrawn pointed to a shimmering blue dot on the star map, Alderaan. The royal house of Organa has long curated a collection of star glass, ancient, unrefined Kyber that predates the Republic. One of those pieces matches the energy signature of the stone taken from Jedha. It is the Space Stone. The Empire moved with the weight of an avalanche. A fleet of 20 Star Destroyers, led by the Executor, jumped into the Alderaan system, not to protect the peaceful world, but to use it as bait. Governor Tarkin, watching from the safety of the Death Star's command bridge, viewed this as a dual opportunity, to test the superlaser's refined focus and to eliminate this interdimensional upstart in one stroke of ultimate order. But Thanos was already there. The Sanctuary II dropped out of a rift directly above the capital city of Alderaan, its shadow swallowing the white spires of the palace. This time, Thanos did not send Outriders. He sent Ebony Maw. The Whisperer of Thanos descended upon the palace like a pale ghost, his telekinetic grace turning the elite Alderaan guard into ragdolls. He didn't use blasters. He used the environment itself, twisting the very rebar of the palace walls into cages for the defenders. "I bring you a great gift," Maw murmured to the terrified Princess Leia Organa as he reached for the glowing blue pendant around her neck. "The mercy of the Titan is upon you. You should be honored to contribute to the great balance."
Suddenly, the sky above Alderaan turned gray as the Imperial fleet arrived. Turbo lasers opened fire from orbit, not at the Sanctuary too, but at the palace itself. Tarkin had no interest in a ground war. He intended to bury the Black Order under the rubble of the Organa legacy. The first volley of green bolts struck the palace's deflector shields, the impact rattling the entire continent. Thanos, standing on the hull of his ship, looked up at the Imperial blockade. He now wore a massive, unfinished gauntlet on his left hand, the Power Stone already set into the knuckles, pulsing with a violent violet light. He raised the fist toward the sky. The Power Stone flared, and a beam of pure destruction erupted from his hand, punching through the atmosphere and slamming into the underbelly of an Imperial Star Destroyer. The ship didn't just explode, it disintegrated, its molecular structure shattered by the raw essence of the stone. The Empire had brought a fleet to a godfight. The atmosphere of Alderaan vibrated with the harmonic resonance of two opposing philosophies of destruction. Above the cloud layer, the Imperial fleet maintained a tight blockade, their triangular silhouettes blotting out the suns, while below, the Sanctuary Second hovered like a predatory insect over the peaceful spires of Alderaan. The princess, held in the telekinetic grip of Ebony Maw, watched in horror as the sky turned a bruised purple. Thanos did not look at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the shimmer of a planetary shield was being battered by both Imperial turbo lasers and the Black Order's orbital bombardment. "Such a waste of symmetry," Maw whispered, his thin fingers hovering inches from the blue stone at Leia's throat. "Your empire seeks to preserve this world by shattering it. My master seeks to preserve the galaxy by thinning the herd. Tell me, little princess, which mercy do you prefer?" Before Leia could respond, a tremor shook the palace foundations. It wasn't an orbital strike, it was a localized implosion of the Force. Darth Vader had made planetfall, bypassing the traditional landing zones by plummeting through the atmosphere in a reinforced drop pod that slammed into the palace courtyard like a meteor. The dust hadn't even settled when the crimson blade of his lightsaber ignited, cutting a circular vent through the reinforced durasteel of the pod. Vader stepped out, his cape billowing in the artificial gale of the palace's failing climate processors. He was flanked by the 501st Legion, the Vader's Fist, who immediately opened fire on the Outrider vanguard. The courtyard became a chaotic tapestry of red blaster bolts and the guttural roars of alien beasts. "The stone, Maw." Thanos' voice boomed over the comlinks, calm and implacable. "The Empire's patience is as thin as their morality. Secure the Space Stone and return." Maw bowed his head toward the sky, but as he reached for the pendant, Vader surged forward. The Sith Lord didn't run, he moved with a terrifying weighted grace, using the Force to catapult himself across the plaza. He swung his lightsaber in a downward cleave, but Maw didn't flinch. With a casual flick of his wrist, the Whisperer tore the stone tiles from the floor, weaving them into a rotating shield that ground against the plasma blade with a screech of tortured rock. "Your Force is a fascinating parlor trick, Shadow Man," Maw sneered, his voice echoing in Vader's mind. "But you are a creature of gravity and bone. I serve a man who has transcended both." Suddenly, the sky turned a blinding, toxic green. The Death Star had entered the system. From the bridge of the superweapon, Tarkin stood with his hands behind his back, his cold eyes reflecting the glow of the Kyber reactor's prime. "Lord Vader is down there," an aide whispered, his voice trembling. "Lord Vader is an instrument of the Emperor," Tarkin replied, his voice devoid of warmth, "and instruments are replaceable. If we can vaporize the Titan and his generals in one strike, the sacrifice of a single Sith and a rebellious world is a bargain the Emperor will applaud. Commencing primary ignition." Thanos, sensing the shift in the cosmic balance, looked up. He felt the massive gathering of Kyber energy in the upper atmosphere, a concentrated sun being birthed by imperial greed. He raised his left hand, the Power Stone glowing with a violent, hungry intensity. He didn't wait for the Death Star to fire. He reached out with his mind, connecting the raw Power Stone to the latent energy of the Space Stone still hanging around Leia's neck. A bridge of blue and purple energy formed between the Titan and the Princess. The air around them began to fold. Space itself groaned as Thanos forced a rift open, not through the warp, but through the very fabric of reality. "You think your ultimate power can hold me?" Thanos challenged the silent stars. As the Death Star's super laser began its final countdown, the Sanctuary 2 fired its tractor beams, not at the palace, but at the Imperial Star Destroyers above. It dragged them into the line of fire, using the Empire's own ships as a meat shield against their own superweapon. The chaos was total. Vader, Maw, and Leia were caught in a localized reality warp as Thanos began to pull the Space Stone toward his gauntlet, ignoring the fire of 1,000 suns descending from the heavens. The green beam of the Death Star did not strike Alderaan, not yet. It slammed into the belly of the Imperial-class Star Destroyer Relentless, which had been telekinetically shoved into the firing lane by Thanos' use of the Power Stone. The massive vessel didn't just explode, it turned into a localized supernova of molten durasteel and ionizing radiation, shielding the palace below for a precious few seconds. In the palace courtyard, the reality warp was reaching a crescendo. Darth Vader, his boots anchored to the cracking stone through the Force, fought against the gravitational tide. He saw the blue space stone, the star glass, ripping away from Princess Leia's neck, hovering in the air between the Sith and the Whisperer. "The Emperor sees all, Ebony Maw." Vader's voice was a guttural roar, competing with the howling wind of the rift. "He has mastered the world between worlds. Your Titan plays with toys he does not understand." Vader reached out, his black-gloved fingers straining. The Space Stone began to drift toward him, its sapphire glow reflecting off his obsidian mask. Ebony Maw's face contorted, a rare flash of effort breaking his serene mask. "Your Emperor is a parasite on the soul of the universe," Maw spat. He flicked his fingers, and the very air around Vader turned into a solid block of pressurized atmosphere, pinning the Sith Lord in place. "My master is the cure." Before the stone could reach either of them, a golden hand clamped shut around it. Thanos had descended. He stood in the center of the spatial distortion, his massive frame unyielding. He didn't use the Force, he used the raw physical dominance of a being who had broken worlds with his bare hands. He slotted the Space Stone into the second housing of his gauntlet. A wave of blue energy surged through him, his veins glowing with celestial light. The rift stabilized instantly. The chaos of the wind died into a terrifying pressurized silence. Thanos looked at Vader, then up at the green star of the Death Star looming in the sky. "Your master has a formidable weapon," Thanos remarked, his voice now layered with the resonance of 2 Infinity Stones. "But he lacks the vision to use it for anything but fear. Fear is a temporary currency, Shadow Man. I deal in the eternal." With a simple clench of his fist, the space around the Sanctuary 2 folded. The massive blade ship didn't move, the universe moved around it. In an instant, the Titan and his fleet vanished from the Alderaan system, leaving the Death Star's second volley to strike nothing but empty space and the burning wreckage of its own escort ships. On the bridge of the Death Star, Grand Moff Tarkin gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. "Trace that signature!" he screamed. "I want their destination!" "Sir," an officer stammered, staring at the long-range scanners, They didn't jump to hyperspace. They simply ceased to be in this sector. But the energy trail, it's headed toward the deep core, toward Coruscant." Thanos wasn't running. He was going to the heart of the machine. He had realized that the Emperor's throne sat atop the largest concentration of Kyber in the known galaxy, the ancient Sith shrine beneath the Imperial Palace. If the Power Stone was the muscle and the Space Stone was the map, then the Mind Stone was hidden within the shadow of the Emperor himself. The smog-choked spires of Coruscant, the gleaming heart of the Galactic Empire, were suddenly bathed in a haunting bioluminescent violet. Above the Imperial Palace, a mountain of durasteel built atop the ruins of the Jedi Temple, the Sanctuary II tore through the planetary shield as if it were parchment. There was no warning, no diplomatic hail. There was only the sound of 1,000 siren droids wailing in a disharmonious chorus as the Black Order began their descent. In the deepest sanctum of the palace, submerged in the cooling fluids of the Sith shrine, Emperor Palpatine sat upon his throne. He did not look at the tactical displays or the panicked officers via HoloLink. His yellow eyes were closed, his wrinkled hands gripping the armrests of his seat. He felt the rift. It wasn't the shimmering, ethereal light of the Force. It was a heavy, metallic weight that threatened to crush the very air in the room. Beside him, the Mind Stone, disguised for decades as the central focusing lens of a Sith holocron, began to pulse with a sickly yellow rhythm. "So," Palpatine hissed, his voice echoing through the vaulted stone, "the Titan from the void has come to claim my secrets. He thinks his stones are the ultimate authority. He has forgotten who carved this galaxy into his image." High above, the sky of Coruscant became a graveyard. The Coruscant Home Defense Fleet, a massive array of star destroyers and orbital platforms, opened fire with everything they had. But Thanos was no longer just a warlord. He was a wielder of 2 Infinity Stones. As the turbo-laser bolts rained down, Thanos raised the gauntlet. The Space Stone flared sapphire, and the incoming energy bolts didn't hit the Sanctuary II. They simply passed through a localized fold in space, emerging behind the Imperial ships and tearing into their own engines. It was a tactical nightmare. The Empire was literally shooting itself in the back. Grand Admiral Thrawn, watching from the bridge of the Chimera, realized the futility of traditional ballistics. "Cease fire," he commanded, his voice cold and analytical. "He is manipulating the geometry of the battlefield. We are providing his ammunition." Thrawn turned to his bridge crew. "Prepare the boarding parties. If we cannot hit him from afar, we will drown him in a sea of stormtroopers. And deploy the Inquisitorius. This is no longer a war of ships, it is a war of souls." On the palace rooftops, the 501st Legion met the first wave of outriders. The elite soldiers of the Empire, veterans of 100 campaigns, were forced into brutal close-quarters combat. E-11 blasters were dialed to maximum power, but the outriders moved with a frenetic energy that bypassed the stormtroopers' training. Suddenly, a golden beam of light struck the central spire of the palace. Thanos landed, his heavy boots cracking the reinforced transparent steel of the Emperor's private hangar. He was alone. He didn't need the Black Order here. He was entering the lair of a god. He walked past the wreckage of TIE interceptors, his gaze fixed on the elevator that led to the Sith shrine. "Your new order is a house of cards, Sidious. You built it on the suffering of billions, yet you lack the courage to finish the work. You don't want balance. You want a throne, and thrones are for the small-minded." The elevator doors hissed open, and out stepped 3 figures in charcoal robes, their faces hidden by sleek, red-slotted masks, the Inquisitorius. They ignited their double-bladed spinning lightsabers, the crimson light reflecting off the Titan's golden chestplate. Thanos didn't even raise the gauntlet. He simply reached out and caught the first blade with his bare hand. The plasma hissed against his skin, but the Power Stone's passive energy shielded his flesh. With a brutal twist, he snapped the hilt like a twig and hurled the Inquisitor into the abyss of the Coruscant skyline. He was a force of nature, and the Emperor was waiting in the dark. The descent into the Sith Shrine was a journey into the concentrated shadow of 1,000 years. As Thanos stepped off the repulsor platform into the subterranean heart of Coruscant, the air grew heavy, tasting of ozone and ancient dried blood. The walls were not made of durasteel, but of a dark, obsidian-like stone that seemed to pulse with a malevolent sentience. In the center of the vast circular chamber, Darth Sidious sat upon a throne of jagged spires, his face hidden beneath the deep cowl of his black robes. Between them, suspended in a stasis field of flickering red energy, sat the Mind Stone. It was embedded in the hilt of an ancient Sith scepter, its yellow glow fighting against the oppressive darkness of the room. "You have traveled far, Titan," Palpatine's voice rasped, a dry rattle that seemed to come from the shadows themselves rather than his throat. "You challenge a god in his own temple is a bold folly. Do you truly believe those trinkets you wear make you the master of this reality?" Thanos didn't stop his steady, rhythmic march. The power and space stones on his gauntlet hummed in a low, dissonant chord, their light casting long, distorted shadows across the Sith inscriptions on the floor. "I am not a god, Sidious. I am a necessity. You cling to this force as if it were a leash, using it to bind a galaxy to your whims. But the universe is screaming for relief. It is out of balance, and you are the weight that tips the scales toward ruin." With a sudden, violent motion, Palpatine raised his hands. Blue streaks of force lightning erupted from his fingertips, a torrential storm of pure agony that illuminated the cavern. Thanos raised the gauntlet, the Power Stone flaring violet to absorb the impact. The lightning splashed against an invisible barrier, grounding itself into the floor and shattering the ancient stone.
"The Force is not a leash, you brute!" Palpatine shrieked, his voice rising in a crescendo of manic power. "It is the very fabric of existence, and I am its weaver!" As the lightning intensified, the Emperor reached out with his mind, tapping into the Soul Stone, hidden for millennia beneath the shrine's foundations, fueled by the collective suffering of the Coruscant underworld. The ground groaned as spectral shapes began to rise from the depths, the spirits of fallen Sith and Jedi alike, bound to the Emperor's will. They swirled around Thanos, their ethereal claws tearing at his mind, trying to find a crack in his indomitable resolve. Thanos grunted, his knees buckling for a brief second under the metaphysical weight. He saw the faces of those he had lost, his planet, his people, the ghosts of Titan, but his eyes remained fixed on the yellow glow of the Mind Stone. "Your ghosts have no power over a man who has already sacrificed everything," Thanos roared. He slammed his fist into the ground, using the Space Stone to create a localized vacuum, sucking the spectral entities into a void of non-existence. The shock wave threw Palpatine back, his throne cracking under the pressure. Thanos reached out, his massive fingers closing around the Mind Stone's stasis field. He crushed the red energy cage as if it were glass. The yellow stone flew into the third slot of the gauntlet, and suddenly the Titan's consciousness expanded. He saw every mind on Coruscant, the fear of the citizens, the cold ambition of the officers, and the jagged, rotting core of the Emperor's soul. Palpatine scrambled to his feet, his composure finally breaking into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He drew a hidden lightsaber, its blade a thin needle of crimson, and lunged. But Thanos was no longer just a warrior. With the Mind Stone, he anticipated the strike before it was even conceived. He caught the Emperor's wrist, the sound of snapping bone echoing through the chamber. "You speak of weaving existence," Thanos whispered, looming over the broken Sith. "But you were only ever a knot in the thread. Now I shall untie you." Above them, the Battle of Coruscant reached its zenith. The sanctuary too began to descend, its massive shadow eclipsing the Imperial Palace as Thanos prepared to claim the final pieces of his mosaic. The Empire's heart was failing, and the Titan was just beginning to squeeze.
The throne room of the Sith Shrine became a pressurized chamber of cosmic displacement. As Thanos stood over the crumpled form of the Emperor, the Mind Stone's yellow light bled into the violet and sapphire hues of the gauntlet, weaving a tapestry of multicolored death across the obsidian walls. Palpatine, his hood thrown back to reveal a face contorted in a mask of scorched pride, did not beg. Even with his wrist shattered and his connection to the physical world frayed, he let out a low, croaking laugh that echoed with the malice of 1,000 years of Sith tradition. "You think you have won?" Palpatine wheezed, his yellow eyes burning with a localized supernova of dark-side energy. "The Soul Stone is not merely a battery, Titan. It is a hunger. It has tasted the life force of this entire ecumenopolis for 10,000 years. It does not belong to the living. It belongs to the shadow." With a sudden, violent surge of the Force, the Emperor didn't strike at Thanos. He struck at the floor. The ancient Sith alchemy woven into the very foundations of Coruscant ignited. The ground beneath Thanos' feet liquefied into a swirling vortex of spirits and necrotic energy. From the depths of the planet's core, the Soul Stone, an amber gem of terrifying density, rose encased in a cage of tortured kyber. It didn't just radiate power, it radiated grief. Every soul that had ever perished in the depths of the Coruscant underworld was tethered to it, a screaming chorus of the forgotten. Thanos roared, his massive frame trembling as the Soul Stone attempted to unmake his very essence. The gauntlet hissed, the three existing stones vibrating in a dissonant symphony as they fought to harmonize with the local reality's anchor. Above them, the ceiling of the shrine began to buckle. The Executor, Darth Vader's flagship, had entered Coruscant's lower atmosphere, its massive prow cutting through the smog like a guillotine. Vader, sensing his master's peril and the encroaching void, commanded an orbital strike directly onto the palace coordinates. "Target the shrine!" Vader's voice crackled through the dying comms of the Imperial Guard. "Level the spire! Let the vacuum take them both!" The palace was struck by a concentrated volley of turbo-laser fire. The shockwave tore through the upper levels, sending tons of reinforced durasteel crashing down into the subterranean depths. Thanos looked up, his eyes reflecting the falling debris and the amber glow of the Soul Stone. He reached out, his hand straining against the metaphysical weight of the planet's collective sorrow. "I have sacrificed my daughter, my people, my soul," Thanos growled, his voice breaking the Emperor's psychic grip. "Your shadow is nothing but a flickering candle against the sun of my will." With a feat of raw physical and spiritual strength, Thanos plunged his hand into the swirling vortex of souls. He seized the Amber Stone. The contact sent a shockwave of orange light through the entire planet, momentarily blinding every living being on Coruscant. The spirits of the Sith Shrine were silenced. The Emperor's laugh cut into a silent gasp of horror as his source of immortality was ripped away. Thanos slotted the Soul Stone into the fourth housing. The gauntlet was nearly complete. The power surging through him was now enough to rewrite the laws of physics on a galactic scale. He looked at the broken Emperor, then at the falling ruins of the palace above. With a flick of the space stone, he froze the falling debris in midair, suspending millions of tons of metal and stone in a stasis field. "The Empire is dead, Sidious," Thanos said, his voice now carrying the weight of a god. "And you are the ghost that haunts its remains. I do not need to kill you. I simply need to remove the imbalance you represent." He closed his fist. The space around the Emperor began to fold, not into a rift, but into a microscopic point of singularity. Palpatine, the master of the dark side, was erased from the timeline, not with a bang, but with a silent, clinical snap of reality. The Sith were gone, but the Titan was only 2 stones away from his ultimate goal, and the Death Star was already appearing in the darkened sky above, its green eye fixed on the new god of Coruscant.
The sky of Coruscant did not just turn black, it bruised. High above the suspended wreckage of the Imperial Palace, the Death Star hung like a mechanical moon of judgment. From its central terminus, the final 2 pieces of the cosmic puzzle, the Reality Stone and the Time Stone, pulsed in a forced synchronicity. The Empire had spent decades researching the world between worlds, a mystical plane that bypassed linear time, and they had localized its anchors within 2 prehistoric artifacts unearthed from the Jedi Temple's deepest vaults. Now those anchors were plugged into the Death Star's primary firing manifold, intended to amplify the super laser into a beam that could delete a planet from history itself. Thanos stood atop the jagged remains of the Senate Rotunda, his gauntlet now housing 4 stones: power, space, mind, and soul. The air around him distorted with a prismatic haze, a localized reality fracture that caused the falling snow of Coruscant's artificial climate to turn into obsidian petals before hitting the ground. He looked up at the green eye of the superweapon, his gaze steady. "They seek to control time and reality through a machine," Thanos rumbled, his voice echoing across the silent, terrified city below. "They build a cage for the infinite and wonder why it screams." With a roar that shook the atmospheric platforms, the Death Star fired. The beam was not the vibrant green of Jeddah or Alderaan. It was a shimmering, translucent white, a lance of pure chronal energy designed to unmake the Titan before he could even raise his hand. But Thanos did not flinch. He clenched his fist, and the power and space stones flared in a violent unison. He didn't just block the beam, he caught it. The energy of the Death Star splashed against an invisible barrier of violet light, the sheer force of the impact pushing Thanos' boots deep into the durasteel roof. "I am inevitable," Thanos shouted, his muscles bulging as he forced his way forward against the tide of unmaking. He reached out with his Mind Stone, reaching into the very heart of the Death Star's computer core, bypassing the firewalls of the Empire's greatest engineers. He felt the 2 missing stones vibrating within the super laser's focus. He didn't wait for them to be fired again. He reached through the Space Stone's rift, his golden gauntlet disappearing into a blue aperture and reappearing inside the Death Star's firing chamber. With a brutal, wrenching motion, he tore the reality and time stones from their mechanical cradles. The superweapon groaned, its internal reactors cascading into a feedback loop of temporal instability. The Death Star began to age and de-age in rapid succession, its hull rusting into dust 1 second and becoming raw ore the next. The final 2 stones flew across the void, snapping into the last slots of the gauntlet. A pillar of white light erupted from Thanos, piercing the clouds and illuminating the entire star system. The gauntlet was complete. The 6 stones hummed in a perfect, terrifying harmony. The music of the spheres turned into a funeral dirge for the old order. Thanos looked at the flickering, dying shape of the Death Star above, then at the sprawling, overpopulated horizon of Coruscant. He saw the trillions of lives, the consumption, the greed, and the order that was merely a mask for rot. He raised his hand, his fingers poised. "The Empire brought peace through fear," Thanos whispered, his voice resonating in the minds of every living being in the galaxy. "I bring peace through mercy. The balance is restored." With a final echoing snap, the white light expanded to swallow the galaxy. The conflict that had defined an era ended not with a final battle, but with a profound, terrifying silence. Across the stars, from the lush forests of Endor to the industrial wastes of Kuat, half of the Imperial stormtroopers, half of the rebel insurgents, and half of the galaxy's teeming billions simply turned to gray ash, drifting away on the solar winds. The Death Star, caught in a temporal feedback loop, vanished into the void, leaving Grand Moff Tarkin and his dreams of ultimate power to dissolve into nothingness. Darth Vader, standing amidst the ruins of his master's palace, watched as his own gloved hand began to flake away into dust. There was no anger, only a strange, cold clarity. The Force, so long unbalanced by the Sith's hunger, felt suddenly eerily still. The Titan had not conquered the Empire, he had simply thinned it until it could no longer sustain its own weight. Thanos sat up on a grassy knoll on a nameless, peaceful world in the Outer Rim, far from the Durasteel graves of Coruscant. The gauntlet was scorched, the metal fused to his skin, but he did not care. He watched the sun rise over a horizon that was finally, truly quiet. The Galactic Empire was a memory, its fleets drifting aimlessly, its bureaucracy shattered. In its place was a galaxy that was emptier, colder, but, in the eyes of the Mad Titan, perfectly balanced. The era of the Sith had ended, replaced by the silent reign of a gardener who had pruned the stars.